The sword versus the scimitar, the war between Christians and Muslims has been waging for thousands of years. It is still waging today in ways that you may not realize. Today, we've got Raymond Ibrahim here with us. He is a scholar when it comes to the history of Islam and its battle against the West and specifically against Christianity, y'all. This is an absolutely fascinating conversation that you are going to learn so much from, so get ready for it. This episode is brought to you by our friends at Constitution Wealth. Christian investors are often shocked to learn that their portfolios include companies supporting causes that go against their faith. That's why I trust Constitution Wealth. They screen investments so your money isn't propping up agendas that conflict with Scripture. ConstitutionWealth.com/Allie for a free consultation. That's ConstitutionWealth.com/Allie. Raymond, thanks so much for taking the time to join us. Could you tell everyone who you are and what you do?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Allie. Thanks for having me. Well, how far back do we go? But
you can go as far back as you want to. Maybe start recent, and then we can back up.
Yeah. Well, I'll actually start from the back, but real quick summary. Blitz.
Okay, sure.
So my family is from Egypt. My mom and father, they're Coptic Christians who came here in the late 60s. I was born here, early 70s, 73, in New Jersey. Which at the time when we were born there weren't Copts or even many Egyptians, but I guess now it's like a little Egyptian town. So it's one of the oldest. But anyway, then we moved out to California when I was 12. Moved around, but as far as this field, how I got into all this, obviously because of my family background, I was interested, especially their Christian background from an Islamic nation, Egypt. Obviously, that kind of created an interest for me right away from early on concerning the nexus of Christianity and Islam.
Yeah.
Even as a child, I was interested in that. And so anyway, long story short, I went to Fresno State and got my history degree where Victor Davis Hanson, who everyone seems to know now. It's funny because at the time when I knew him, we're talking like 25 years ago, he was famous at Fresno State, but he was just a classicist, a historian who writes military history, and I took those kinds of courses with him. Anyway, I got my degree in history, and I was focusing on Islam and Christianity again, including with languages I was studying like Greek and Arabic. And so my thesis was actually about the very first military encounter between Islam and Christendom, the most decisive one, which was the Battle of Yarmouk in the year 636. Anyway, then 9/11 happened right around when I was finishing up my thesis. And that's what really piqued my interest originally, because I was always just involved in history and philosophy and theology. And I always thought of it as on its own over there. And then what happens in the now, especially because I was still younger and, drinking the Kool-Aid that the media was offering us about Islam. And I just thought it was, it's not what it used to be. And then 9/11 happened and, I started reading what Osama bin Laden was saying in Arabic, and it wasn't what he was saying to Americans. It was very different. He was actually quoting, oftentimes verbatim, the stuff that I was writing in my thesis, which was written hundreds of years ago, and that's how he was thinking. So that immediately piqued my interest, the continuity that actually what I was studying, the Islamic conquest of the 7th century. Which are seen as some sort of, esoteric, academic pursuit, were actually very much alive for these guys who were declared war on the United States, essentially.
And what was that? What was bin Laden saying in Arabic that he wasn't saying in English?
Yeah. Okay. So fast forward now after, so I write my thesis and 9/11 happens. And then even talking with Victor Davis Hanson, he's like, you should really continue on. And I ended up going to Georgetown University, the Center of Contemporary Arab Studies, which now I understand the political, significance of it. And maybe I'll get into that, but I was a naive student at the time. Anyway, and then I got a job at the Library of Congress in the Near East section, and where I was like a kid in a toy store because it was all these books in all these languages, and I would peruse through them. And so this is how we get to bin Laden. Then I came across uncatalogued writings from the Arab world, because the Arab world the whole world sends books to the Library of Congress. Writings from Osama bin Laden, And up until then, so what I was reading earlier from the news was Osama bin Laden saying, hey, we did this to you because you did this to us. This is about reciprocal treatment. And his grievance list was just endless. Yeah. Okay.
Well, that was circulating on TikTok recently. And there were Americans, college students saying, wow, maybe Osama bin Laden was right. And it was basically that. Right. Look, this is the reason we attacked you because of all of this awful stuff that America has done. Right. But you're saying that's not what he was saying in Arabic.
No. So that's what he was saying. That's what the BBC and CNN and even Fox News were disseminating, which was this grievance mantra, okay? And it went from everything, from because you support Israel, from because of colonialism, from because of not signing the Kyoto Protocol for the environment. It was just like an endless list, right? Which was absurd, but a lot of people were believing it. Okay, it was for the Crusades and how you guys did X, Y, and Z. Then, so now I'm at the Library of Congress and I come through all these Arabic books and I find actual treatises written by Osama bin Laden and Ayman Zawahiri. And now they're talking to Arabs and Muslims in Arabic, and it's a completely different story. Okay, now they don't mention any grievances. Now it's just what we as Muslims must hate these people because they're kafir, they're infidels. They are our enemies no matter what. Even if they're nice to us, we have to hate them. And within all this, of course, it's punctuated by Islamic scriptures validating their arguments, right?
This is what you read from sources written by bin Laden in a Library of Congress right after 9/11 happened?
Yeah, this would be probably around 2004. I came across all this.
Wow.
And then, so long story short, I was taken aback. And this is, so when I told you, my eyes were opened at how like they were talking about the past, it was during that time. Okay. Mm-hmm. When it happened, when I was still writing my thesis, I was just amazed that, just the general jihad mentality thing was still happening. And so anyway, long story short, with those writings, which brings us up to what you're talking about, the TikTok thing, is I translated the book. I got a book deal. It was published by Doubleday in 2007. It's called The Al-Qaeda Reader. And what I did is I juxtaposed what Al-Qaeda had been saying to Westerners directly, which was all just grievances. And, if you leave us alone, we'll leave you alone. And then I put what they were saying to Muslims. And it was basically ISIS. Okay. As you know, with ISIS, they're unapologetic about their hatred for infidels. ISIS, to their credit, has gone on record to say, we hate you on principle, not because of what you've done. So at least they're being honest.
So they're not using the propaganda. No. So why is it that Al-Qaeda or bin Laden was using these propagandistic tools that we often see from China, Russia, these other actors that don't like the United States, which is they're like festering and digging into the divisions that we already have. They're appealing to progressives. Maybe sometimes they're appealing to someone else, trying to garner sympathy. So why does ISIS not take that approach, but Al-Qaeda does?
Well, that's actually a good question. So with Al-Qaeda, they was effective what they were doing because they were addressing the West, like I said, pulling on their heartstrings and making
it's still working.
Yeah, of course, making very, very, very good arguments. So when the TikTok thing came out recently, this was great for me because I managed to write several articles by simply recycling what I had written from 15 years ago and showing how, because they were actually citing the same stuff that I had debunked in the Al-Qaeda Reader, because they would take letters where he said, oh, America did this to us, this is why we're fighting back. And then I had shown how in another letter to Muslims, he said, well, it actually doesn't matter. There are enemies per se. Okay.
Right.
So they were actually kind of smart. And what they were doing is exploiting sort of Western guilt, which is at an all-time high, as usual. It's something no other civilization has for whatever reason. Maybe we'll get into that. Whereas ISIS, and that's actually a good question, why doesn't ISIS do this? And, there's a lot of conspiratorial theories as to why, but one of them, on the surface would be that they're not going to play that game. They're proud. We're not going to humor you. We want you to know you're a filthy infidel and we hate your guts and we're not scared of you. Whereas Al-Qaeda and other Islamist kind of organizations, it's a little dishonorable what they're doing because they're being two-faced and they get exposed, as I had exposed them at the time. But still, you still have both elements. A lot of, I would say the vast majority of Islamist type organizations and individuals still play the guilt card. With your average Westerner, because your average Westerner is pretty ignorant about actually what had happened between Islam and the West historically.
Quick pause to remind you guys, if you were not able to make share the arrows, or even if you were and you want to see the recording of it, it will be available to Blaze TV subscribers this Monday, October 20th. All you have to do is subscribe to Blaze TV, blazetv.com/Allie. You can use promo code Allie. You'll get $20 off the subscription, and you won't only get to see Share the Arrows, our Christian Women's Conference. You'll also be able to access all kinds of Blaze TV subscriber exclusive content. So check that out, blazetv.com/Allie. Before we get back into that fascinating conversation, let me tell you about Every Life. Every Life is America's pro-life diaper company. They are the company that we use for our diapers and wipes. Super effective, clean materials. Love this is a pro-life company that donates to pro-life causes and pregnancy centers across the country, unlike most other diaper companies. But they don't just make diapers. Now they have a new line called Every Life Women. This is a clean, premium, feminine care line that boldly proclaims God's truth, that womanhood is beautiful, that it's intentional, and that it is worthy of celebration. They've got a new line of period care that includes pads, tampons, period underwear, and even a postpartum recovery bundle. Sorry, related bros out there. This ad is only for the related gals. Go to everylife.com/women. Use code Allie10 to save on Every Life Women, because womanhood is not up for debate. It's beautifully and intentionally designed by God. That's everylife.com/women, code Allie10. Okay, let's go back to the basics. I just want to know from your study, what is Islam? Like, what do they believe?
Okay, Islam. Well, let's start with the word Islam. It comes and here, as I explained to you, you're going to see a lot of things that you had heard and how they were wrong. So one of the things that maybe you've heard is Islam means peace, right? And again, as usual, all the great lies have some truth to them. So the word in Arabic, words are always cognates of certain roots, and the word for peace and the word for submission, which is what Islam is, are actually the same root. And so Islam means that salam is peace. Islam means submit and have peace. Okay. All right. So that's the religion. That's its very name. And a Muslim, we say Muslim, and they don't like that because in Arabic, a Muslim means someone who is oppressed. But a Muslim, to pronounce it their way.
I didn't know that they didn't like that name.
Well, no. Their name is Muslim, but Americans pronounce it Muslim, and that's an Arabic word too.
Oh, it's just different.
It means you're an oppressed person.
Okay.
So it's an interesting pun that Americans are calling them oppressed, which, okay.
Yeah.
Anyway, so a Muslim or a Muslim is someone who has submitted, and which begs the question, what are they submitting to? And this is where what's known as Islamic law or Sharia comes into play. And Islam, I think the best way to understand it, and the problem that Christians have, is they tend to project their sort of religious character onto other people, and they think because Christianity has a very spiritual element, and it's not about the law, at least modern day Christianity. They think that's how Islam is, but Islam is actually, it has nothing to do with, the condition of your heart with God. It's just laws. It's like, how do you live your daily life? All right. And it's actually so codified that most people don't know this. There's actually everything in the world that you can do in Islam. There's 5 categories. It's either obligatory, so like the 5 pillars, right? The prayers and the fasting, the zakat. It's recommended. You should do it, but you won't be punished. It's neutral. Okay, it doesn't matter. It's disliked. You don't have to not do it, but if you do, we'd rather you don't. And then it's forbidden. Everything in life. So that's, when you think about that, that's not how most people think of religion, right? It's that codified. And then for our purposes, and I always say this because a lot of people, when they talk negatively or criticize Islam, they just talk about everything. Whereas for me, I think what's interesting and useful is to just ascertain the things about Islam that are negative towards me as a non-Muslim. Okay, and they're actually quite limited, but they're also far-reaching. And they are basically, I've narrowed them down to 3 doctrines. One, and I can tell you the name in Arabic, but it preaches love and loyalty for fellow Muslims and hatred for non-Muslims, which is why Al-Qaeda and ISIS would say, irrespective of what the infidel does, we have to hate them. All right.
Every type of Muslim.
Yeah. Sunni, Shia.
So even those, because I've noticed as Islam has come to the West, and more of our neighbors are Muslim, and they've got their social media presence. And when you see the snippets of their sermons or whatever they call it in their services, it doesn't sound that different than what a lot of pastors in Christian churches will say. Right. They'll say, show the other gender double honor, be friendly neighbors, serve others. And it's like, I think to a lot of people, it's like, well, that must be a different kind of Islam than the Islam that we're seeing in Afghanistan. But what you're saying is every single Muslim everywhere abides by the principles you're talking about.
I wouldn't go so far to say that, because I would say I know how every Muslim believes. What I'm saying is this is what Islam teaches.
Yeah.
And if you want to be a representative and a true follower of Islam, that's what you will do. But I mean, if you want to be a homosexual Muslim and say, you can do that, but obviously you're going against the religion. Well, so what I mean is, here's what's going on. The so-called moderate Muslims, they exist. And some of them, whether it's a pretense, some of them it may be sincere. But what we need to understand is they're not representative of Islam, okay? So what we do is, the dichotomy that's sort of pushed on us is that you have a moderate Muslim who's apparently following true Islam, and then you have the radicals who are like twisting it and turning it into something violent.
That's what we in the West think, for sure.
Exactly. That's what we think. The truth is, you do have the two groups, but what the truth is that the so-called radical is actually following normative mainstream Islam, which by our standards is radical, but not by their standards. And the so-called moderate Muslim, if he's truly moderate, and he may be, he or she, he's just not following it. It's like saying I'm a Christian, but then I do all sorts of things that are just completely not part of Christianity. Okay, right. So you can do that, but you're not representing true Christianity. So that's, I think, the dichotomy exists. You do have that and that. But the falsehood is thinking that the guys who act moderate represent real Islam and the other guys represent false Islam. It's actually the other way around.
Mm-hmm. So true Islam teaches that there is a love and loyalty towards other Muslims and a hatred for all infidels.
Yeah. So the radicals will be upfront. The ISIS types will be proud about it and we'll talk about it. The other ones will, so when you talk about, you've listened to one of their sermons and it sounds not unlike a Christian pastor. Okay, well, a lot of that is because they know about those doctrines, but they also know there's a lot of infidels around them and word can get out. So they try not to talk about that too much. Whereas if it's in the Islamic world, where they're comfortable and they don't, what about infidels? Then they talk about it. And it becomes very, so it is obviously for show. I'll give you a very, an anecdote when I worked at the Library of Congress, which kind of, speaks to what we're talking about. There were a lot of Muslims that worked there. And, I was actually friendly with a lot of them. And one of them, I could tell he was a radical, like deep down inside. He had he was a Salafi, which, he had like a beard and it was red and they'd shave the muzzle, which I understand what that means. It means I'm following Muhammad to a T. And but then he would act moderate and talk about, no, we can be friends with the non-Muslim. So I would debate him, just me and him, like sitting at a cafeteria and be like, well, what about the verse that says you have to hate the Muslims? And what about the verse about jihad and this and that? And then we started talking about, and this is important for everyone, for Westerners to understand, there's this whole thing about abrogation in the Quran. Okay, because the Quran was revealed piecemeal to Muhammad and over years, you will find contradictions. And so what the moderates will do is they'll take the good stuff, right? And most of the violent stuff comes later in Muhammad's career. And the reason for that is in the beginning of his career, he was weak, outnumbered. So it was actually beneficial for him to preach, you have your religion, I have my religion, which is one of the verses in the Quran. And there's no compulsion in religion. These are the verses that moderates always quote, and they are in the Quran. Okay, but then when he became stronger, he went on the war path, and then the jihading began, okay, and the conquest. And that's when he started receiving the militants, the ones that I'm talking about, okay? You got to hate them. You can't befriend them. You have to wage jihad on them. Quran 929, it's known as one of the sword verses. And it basically says, fight the people of the book, which means the Jews and the Christians, until they pay tribute and feel themselves humbled, okay? And that right there was an open-ended declaration of nonstop war against Jews and Christians, okay? And that's like, they're the lucky ones, because the other sword verse talks about the pagans, and they're just to be killed right away. They can't even pay tribute, theoretically, okay? So these are the violent verses that come later. Now, the abrogation was the Muslim scholars later on were, how do we make sense of the peaceful and the violent? Well, which do we follow? And the abrogation idea is whatever came later in Muhammad's lifetime supplants the earlier one, okay? And that's the final word. So the earlier one mattered during the 10 years that Muhammad was weak, for example, but they don't pertain to us anymore, us as Muslims. And the other view, which is very similar, says, no, they both work, and it depends on the particular Muslim today where he finds himself. So if you find yourself you're in a strong position, you should go by the militant, violent one. If you find yourself weak, like Muhammad was, then you should preach peace and tolerance, okay? And they're known as the older peaceful ones are the Mecca verses, and the more violent one are the Medina verses, because that's where they were revealed. Later, he went to Medina, became stronger. So I told this Muslim guy about that. And at first, he kind of acted dumb, like, oh, I don't know about that, because he kept saying, no, I believe in peace. But I already know, I can tell he's a radical. And then finally, he got really frustrated. And he says, well, what do you want from me? I live in Mecca. And what he meant is, I am following this peaceful Meccan verses because like Muhammad, when he was weak and outnumbered in Mecca, I'm in Washington, D.C., weak and outnumbered by all you infidels. So of course I'm going to preach the peace. So, okay. So that's, to me, that was very telling and eye-opening. And I think elements of that.
Wow. That makes so much sense actually to how it has infiltrated Western civilization, because when Muslims are outnumbered, they sound and act a lot like their Christian neighbors. Yeah. And then your Christian neighbors, in the name of love and helping, the people around us, are thinking, well, I mean, we're all basically the same. We all worship the same God, but that's not quite right.
Nope, it's not at all. And Muslims understand that, and they're exploiting it because it's beneficial to them. It works just perfectly. And that's one of the reasons Muslims can get away with this, mostly in the West, because Westerners come from a Christian heritage, whether they are or aren't. And even if they're not Christians, Christian ideas have so suffused their worldview, all that stuff that, originally when liberalism was still not crazy and it was good, being nice to people and helping them, that comes from a Christian framework and didn't just develop out of nowhere. And, giving the guy, giving someone the benefit of the doubt and being helpful. So that's why, it's like you're mixing two bad groups. One is very susceptible to being exploited. Yeah. And the other is going to exploit as much as it can. Okay. And so that's sort of what's happening.
Next sponsor is Masa chips. Y'all, we love Masa chips so much. These are the best chips, not only because they're incredible ingredients. They don't have like citric acid or canola oil or anything fake in them at all. It's just sea salt, organic corn, and 100% grass-fed beef tallow. They're so good. And they also really work. And I know you're like, what are you talking about? Especially those in like the Midwest, you might not know the importance of a quality chip when you are dipping it in your guacamole, but it really matters because it is frustrating when you have those thin little tortilla chips and they keep breaking. This is very important for us Tex-Mex lovers down here. And that's why I love Masa chips, because they're an effective chip, they're a healthy chip, and they're a great tasting chip. Support this amazing company. Go to masachips.com/AllieB. Use code AllieB for 25% off your first order. That's masachips.com/AllieB, code AllieB. Okay, what is that third doctrine? You listed the two first doctrine, love for Muslims, hate for the infidel. With the third?
Right. So the love and the hate, that's actually, it's in Arabic, it's known as al-wala wal-bara. It's actually one doctrine. The second doctrine is, and the way I explain it is, and so, by the way, before we leave the love and the hate, the best and easiest way, I think, to understand it is it's tribalism. It's deified tribalism. It's now, we are Muslims, we hate you. So it's kind of like racism, okay? But it's not about race. It's about religion. It's religious supremacism, okay? So we don't deal with you. Muslims are brothers to each other, even if one is Arab and one is, Turkish or black. And theoretically, that's how it should be. And, the infidel, we have to hate him. Now that obviously leads to the next more important, more familiar doctrine, jihad. So jihad is warfare to conquer the non-Muslim world. And the reason that love and hate is so powerful because you need an ideology like that to fuel jihad. because now if I always hate you because you're the tribal outsider, it's going to make sense for me to want to fight you and subvert you and kill you and enslave you and whatever, because you are the enemy and God tells me to hate you.
And jihad means literally?
Jihad, okay, so jihad, well, when you translate a word, the older scholars, sometimes what they would do is they would take a word and translate it into what it really, not literally what it means, but the connotation that everyone, an Arab here, would understand. So they used to translate jihad as holy war, which is perfectly legitimate because that's kind of what it means. But the word itself means to struggle. And I always find it funny because a lot of the Muslim apologists point this out and they say, oh, you crazy Islamophobes, jihad doesn't mean holy war, it means struggle. In fact, it does, but that actually makes it worse. And it really underscores how dangerous jihad is. Because yes, jihad does mean to struggle on behalf of Islam so you can overpower and overcome the infidel world. Okay. And its historical manifestation has been through arms, through violence, because no one, including and especially Europeans, pre-modern Europeans, was going to be suckered into being conquered the way they are now. So the only way to do jihad was through force and violence. Okay. But in the Common Era, there's other forms of jihads that the Islamic scholars have actually articulated. And they're known as, for example, jihad of the tongue and jihad of the pen. That means lying and propaganda. Okay, on behalf of Islam. There's jihad of the money, which means I'm a rich billionaire Saudi. I don't commit to jihad, but I send millions to support it. And there's the baby jihad, okay, which is, and a lot of the women see this as their burden, which is I'm going to have as many children as I can have. We're going to flood the world with Muhammads, which they're already doing in a lot of Western European capitals. The number one newborn baby boy name is Muhammad. So actually, when people argue, oh, jihad just means struggle, yeah, it does. And in fact, there's various manifestations of how this is happening, even though historically it was through holy war.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so what is this third doctrine?
So the third one is more of a historical one, but it's, so when I was telling you about Quran 9:29, fight the people of the book, the Christians and the Jews, until they pay tribute and embrace living as a second-class citizen. So now, okay, you started off with the hate, you fought, you conquered. Now you got to keep these people living as just, at best, second class, maybe third class citizens. And the people suffering from this today would be, non-Muslim minorities, Christians, Yazidis, Druze, as we saw recently, who live under Islamic rule because they're continuously being mistreated. And we're talking about millions of people around the world. So it wouldn't, in here in this setting or in the West, it's not too applicable because Westerners are still not under the yoke or the boot of the Muslim still. So it doesn't really apply, but it just shows you, it starts off with the hatred and the loyalty to fellow Muslims and tribalism. And then that manifests itself through violence and war, or just jihad in general, which is different manifestations, including peaceful ways. And then the end result is if you're still alive, you are a low-life second-class citizen.
Muslims believe that they are from the line of Ishmael. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yes. And Muhammad was who? Like, why did he start this religion? How did he gain all his power?
Well, it's interesting when you look at Muhammad's life, according to Muslim sources, of course. He starts off, okay, according to the Islamic tradition, he's born in 570. And he's at age of 40, so around 610. Gabriel visits him, right, and starts pontificating to him, or actually, Quran means to recite. So they start reciting the ayat, or the verses that keep coming piecemeal until he dies. Okay, so from 610 to 632, and the first 10 years when he's living in Mecca, nobody followed him. It was just, and he was poor, and he was married to a rich widow, older than him, who was essentially taking care of him. And his father and parents, he was raised by his uncle, and he was just kind of like seen as a laughingstock. And a lot of the Quraysh, the tribes that were in Mecca, would laugh at him and mock him. And this, of course, is when we get the peaceful verses, as I was saying, right? You have your religion, I have mine. Don't persecute me, I won't persecute, because he was weak and he was outnumbered. And then when he finally went to Medina, he actually became powerful, and he got a lot of tribes to join and work with him. And so I would argue that has from day one been the blueprint of Islam. Islam was rewarding to men, especially. So now, if you join the winning team and you join Muhammad's caravan, we're gonna kill, we're gonna rape, we're gonna enslave, we're gonna plunder, and best of all, I mean, tribal societies did this always anyway. But best of all, now we're gonna go to heaven for it if we get killed, and we're martyrs, and we get more of that in paradise. Okay, so that's why I often say Muhammad, basically his genius was he deified tribalism, and now it wasn't just me against the other. But it's me against the other, and then and the more I kill them, the more I'm going to be rewarded in the here and hereafter. Mm-hmm. And then, and the men, of course, I say men, to get Arab men to follow him, you got all, the sex slavery as being codified as in the Quran. I mean, think about it. God is actually telling you as a man, you can go and rape women. Yeah. Okay, that's their God.
And children, correct?
Well, of course.
Muhammad took a child bride, Aisha, she was 6, right? Yeah. But didn't consummate until 9. Yeah. So gracious. Right. And is that why we see, it seems, an acceptance of pedophilia? I mean, I read a very interesting article that kind of brought this to mind a few years ago. And it was actually about Jeffrey Epstein, but it was like the reason that we in the West rightly have a revulsion against Jeffrey Epstein is because of our Christian underpinnings and because Christianity, and going all the way back to Genesis, said that marriage was about being able to have children. That right there defined marriage as between not a man and anyone, but a man and a woman who is able to bear children. So just inherently in Judaism and Christianity, you see that you got to be an adult. But we don't see that in Islam. No, it's it's catering to every man's desires, whatever they may be. Okay, for women, sex slaves, young, and there's Quranic verse. I mean, pedophilia with boys is a very real thing. It's very interesting because, especially as someone who studies history, really, it was very, very common amongst Muslims, especially the Turks. It was known as a Turkish disease in the medieval era, and Christian Europeans would almost like try to kill their kids before having them being kidnapped. Okay, and anyway, and even in the Quran, you have like these beautiful servant boys in heaven, which is kind of ambiguous, and some people say it's meant to be sexually enticing. Next sponsor for the day is Jace Medical. This is a way to stay prepared for your family. You don't want to get in a situation where you can't access the medication that you need. Could be a supply chain issue, could be a weather issue. Who knows what is going on, but you need antibiotics. What if something happens? You get an infection, your child gets an infection. This could be life-saving. So get your Jace case. That is a stash of life-saving antibiotics for the most common infections. Then get a Jace Daily case. That is a year-long supply of the prescriptions that you and your family rely on. This is a way not to be paranoid, but just to be prepared for you and your family. Go to jace.com. That's JASE.com. Use code Allie at checkout for a discount on your order. That's jace.com, code Allie. So why do Muslims want to come to America if they can live basically in what you described as Medina, where they have power and they have the ability to exact their rule however they want to in the Middle East? But they come here and it's not like they, disseminate. They don't spread out. They concentrate in Dearborn, Michigan, in Houston, Texas, in Minnesota, and in London and other parts of the world as well. Is there a strategy there? Is there a specific purpose why they are infiltrating the West the way they are?
Well, I mean, first and foremost, I would say it's just opportunism. I'm coming because, you're right. In my country, I can live according to pure Islam. I don't have to dissemble. But their countries are poor and they live, oftentimes in a horrific way. So primarily they're coming here because, and you believe it or not, because historically it was forbidden for Muslims to willingly live amongst infidels due to the hate and tribalism, that they eventually all these scholars came up with fatwas or decrees allowing it. But as long as you maintain your Islam in your heart, and the sort of like pretext they all follow is, if I'm here to help convert them, all right, because that's one of the reasons a Muslim can go and live amongst non-Muslims. He's engaged in what's called dawah. He's calling them to Islam. So a lot of them, that's the pretext. But they're not here to assimilate at all. I just told you, they hate the infidel. Okay. They're here to benefit. Okay. Whether that means from actually having opportunities to get a job, or more likely than not from just getting freebies, as you see in a lot of these countries where they just go as migrants and they put them in hotels and, stuff that the actual citizens who built the nations can't get. So in other words, they're doing it because it's opportunistic for them. But the tribalism and the hatred is still there. And so it regularly manifests itself in what we see, whether it's in America or whether more likely and more vividly and graphically in Western Europe, because the numbers are greater. So yeah, they're not here to assimilate. They actually despise Western culture. Okay. But they want the good stuff that the West produces.
Yeah. Muslim migrants are responsible for a disproportionate number of sex crimes, especially in European countries.
Oh, yeah.
And we see the tolerance for that. It seems to be lowering, which that part is good. Obviously, the crimes are not. Why do you think that there is disproportionate representation of Muslims when it comes to those kinds of crimes?
Well, okay. So if you go to the Islamic world, you're going to see the same kind of crimes being exacted against non-Muslims, Christian minorities, Hindus, whatever, Yazidis, Druze, all sorts of Shias, who are the minority. You're going to see the same sorts of things because they're actually, again, they go back to the heart of Islam. You have it in the Quran where their God actually it tells them not only can you have 4 wives, okay, polygamy, but you can have, it's called what your right hand possesses, which means any woman you conquer who's an infidel, okay? The non-Muslim exists to be plundered, enslaved, okay, killed. When back in the media, in the pre-modern era, even if they wanted, let's say a European wanted to send a delegation to talk to some caliph or something, the caliph had to go out of his way to make sure and send a special license to that person so he can travel through the Muslim land without being killed.
Wow.
Because the default situation is once he sets foot, he gets killed. Okay, I mean, this is why, by the way, this is why the New World was found. All these sailors from Europe were going west because they couldn't go east because that was the Islamic world. And once you go there, you're dead. Okay, once they get a hold of you, that's what prompted people sailing westward to try to get around, the Islamic East. So I lost my train of thought. What was?
That's okay. Just the reason I'm interested in the theological reason, which you've already touched on, why it seems like those kinds of crimes against women and little girls seem to be especially prevalent in Islam.
Right. Okay, so yeah, that's what I was sort of getting at, which is that the default position between Muslim and non-Muslim is you're my enemy, and if you're a woman, okay, and now, okay, so one of the themes that very few people understand is that, we know what happened in England and the so-called grooming gangs, but it's also happening all throughout Europe, right? In Sweden and
you say so-called.
Well, because I mean that word, I don't. It's kind of very subjective. What's going on? Is it just straight up rape, which we can call it that, or is grooming a euphemism?
Yeah.
I guess that's a real debate, which I'm not too privy to, but I've heard both sides, and so that's why I put it in quotes.
They were gangs who were raping children. We know that much, it seems.
Right. But some people argue, no, that these, they were actually seduced and groomed, and they thought they were their boyfriend or whatever. And I'm not making that argument. That's why I'm saying for the longest time, the word I would always hear, including from the right wing, is grooming. So, but yeah, it is rape, obviously. Now, the thing about that, not just in England, but all throughout Northern Europe, and one of the funniest things, and again, here's the importance of of understanding continuity when it comes to Islam and how unwavering it is. I've written a lot about this phenomenon, and oftentimes the woman who's raped or whatever happened to her, the Muslim will say some really degrading stuff like, okay, you white women exist for this. You white women are just good for this. You white women like it, okay? That sort of thing. Now, what's funny is, because I study history, when you go way back, literally almost Muhammad's time, that kind of thinking existed, okay? So it starts with Muhammad, who during one of his campaigns against the Eastern Roman Empire, which would be, I guess, white, Greeks, he tried to cajole one of his men by saying, who didn't want to commit and go fight. He's like, but don't you want the blonde women? right? And now after that, after Muhammad, then you get all these scholars who are writing in the 8th and ninth century. We're talking well over 1,000 years, who say the same things, who say literally white women, European women. They usually would talk about Byzantine women because that's who's closest to them, but also Frankish women. And the same exact mentality. They like it. They're good for it. They're all sluts and whores. Okay. So, and they also coveted and wanted them. So one of the, things that few people understand is all the Viking slave raids on England and France and wherever, Northern European, a lot of those people were actually sold to the Abbasid caliphates because there was a premium for white slaves. So I tell you all this to show you that, you fast forward and you go to these countries now and you see the same exact behavior, because you're asking me, well, why is it Muslims who are disproportionate? And you see the same exact behavior and you find that, well, this is actually, they're just echoing their own heritage, which goes back over a millennium straight to their prophet.
Yeah.
So it's not surprising. Same thing with the crime, just crimes in general, theft.
Yeah.
Again, if you're so remember jizya is you pay tribute. If you're an infidel and now you're under Muslim rule, jizya, you have to pay us tribute so we don't kill you. So Muslim clerics, I remember one, he's very famous in England, and he says welfare, British welfare, because he was getting a lot of welfare because he had like 4 wives and 10 kids. And he says, well, this is jizya. They owe it to us. Okay. So it's that mentality, I'm here in the West, not to contribute, not to assimilate. I'm here to take. Okay. And, it's just amazing that we have then, the other side is actually, which we don't talk enough about, is the West. Because to me, what's happening today is kind of unprecedented, but a lot of it is self-induced.
Yeah.
This isn't, back in the day when Muslims would invade Europe, they fought tooth and nail to keep them out.
And that's where I want to go.
Okay.
Let's go back. Let's go back, because you're talking about all of this and you're like, well, it makes a lot more sense now when we look at history and we see Christians doing everything they could to defeat the Muslim world.
Right.
And I've heard people point to that part of Christian history as an example of bad Christianity,
of course,
as evil, oppressive Christianity when they plundered the Muslim world.
Right.
But when you're talking about what Muhammad said, what the scholars were saying about, raping and pillaging their women and probably girls, it kind of makes more sense why they were so aggressive. So tell us what really happened, going all the way back.
Sure. Yeah. Well, okay. Now you've come to my forte.
I'm excited.
Yeah. Well, great. So first of all, you're absolutely right. That what's presented is that the bad Christians were the guys who resisted this, okay? And they won't even tell you they resisted. They'll just say there was no problems. It's the Christians who started, and it was the Christians who were attacking and hurting Muslims. That's the narrative.
About what time?
Well, they usually will reference the Crusades. I'll give you a very perfect quote. So I don't know if you ever heard of John Esposito. So, he was a professor at Georgetown University, and he was a big deal back in like the 2010s, and he wrote a lot of books. He's like the editor of the Oxford History of Islam. Well, he's a big deal. I remember a lot of, the intelligence department go to him for information. So he has this line in one of his books, which I've literally memorized because I've quoted it so many times because it's just so absurd. He says that 5 centuries of peaceful coexistence between Muslims and Christians elapsed before an imperial papal power play, he's talking about the Crusades, launched a series of holy wars, causing enduring mistrust and resentment from Muslims to the West, okay?
That's impressive.
Yeah. So what he's trying to say is before the First Crusade, in the year 1095, that's when it was called, and Islam, so Muslim, Muhammad dies in 632. So we're talking well over 4 centuries, right? He's saying all that was just, peace and love between Muslims and Christians. Well, in the real world, what happened is this. People, and here we go again, with the intentional ignorance. People forget when we talk about Christianity and Christendom, when Muhammad was alive or during the 7th century, the vast majority of it was in what's today called the Islamic world. Okay, it was in Egypt, it was in Syria, it was in Turkey, Asia Minor, it was all throughout North Africa. Okay, so actually Europe, when we think of Christendom, was the smaller kind of little brother of the big Christian world, which is why Constantine, really the first Christian emperor, moved it from Rome to New Rome, Constantinople in the east. Or put it this way, there's 5 major sees or centers of Christianity, and only one was in the west, Rome, which is what Christians know. The other 4, Alexandria, Antioch, Jerusalem, and later Constantinople, which were just as equal, are now part of the Islamic world. Okay, so to give you the brief lesson from the year Muhammad died, 632 to 732, Muslims literally have conquered almost 3/4 of the ancient Christian world through sheer savage violence from their own sources. Okay, because they actually, in their own sources, they boast about, because that proves the power of Allah, okay?
Yeah. And this was all before the Crusades.
Oh, yeah. I mean...
And it's kind of obvious when you think about it. You don't even have to be a scholar of history to think, well, of course that used to be Christian and now it's Muslim. How did that happen? But, there are a lot of things like that in the world that we haven't really thought about.
Right. And the reason I said 732 is because that's the famous Battle of Tours. So 632, Muhammad dies. 732, they are in the middle of France. And they've already conquered Spain. They've conquered all of North Africa from Egypt to Morocco. They've conquered the Middle East, Greater Syria, which encompasses Lebanon, Israel, Jordan, all that nation, all those regions. And, and then thereafter, it's a continuous bombardment on the Mediterranean. And then later the Turks come and they become they're Muslim and they become the new standard bearers of Islam. And the jihad is rekindled. And now Asia Minor is conquered. And now all that's conquered. And then right before the First Crusade is when the Turks, who are extremely savage and violent, come and conquer Asia Minor and also the Holy Land. And they now, so according to the sources, the Armenians, we talk about the Armenian genocide. Actually, the Turks were genociding them over a millennium before the Armenian genocide. If you look at the sources, in the 11th century, when they started pouring into Armenia and then later Anatolia, Asia Minor, according to contemporary sources, they literally were killing tens of thousands of Christians and burning and destroying tens of thousands of churches, okay? In one city, Ani, an Armenian city, which was the capital at the time, was known as the 1,001 city of the 1,001 churches. They were all burned to the ground. Okay, so this is now, and this is what prompted the emperor, the Byzantine emperor Alexius, to call for aid from the West. And at the same time, Western pilgrims who had always been going to Jerusalem, to the Holy Land, were being attacked and killed and mauled. One of the worst, the pilgrims especially, one of the worst instances, which is well recorded, occurred in 1064. It was a large German pilgrimage. And, eyewitness sources talk about not only did they kill everyone, but they took, they describe her as a beautiful abbess or, a nun they told her don't go, but she really wanted to go to pilgrimage. And they took her, and it says these shameless men gang raped her until she died. Okay. And then it says at the end, and they did this sort of thing all the time. That is what led to the First Crusade. Okay. So think of what I just told you. In 1 year, even before that, in the year 1009. Okay. So what we're talking about, the Seljuk Turks and what's happening, this is from like 1030s all the way to 1095. But in 1009, now you have a Fatimid, a Shia caliph from Egypt, who actually in that year alone destroyed, according to a Muslim source, 30,000 churches. Wow. And synagogues in Egypt and Greater Syria, including the Holy Sepulchre, or the Church of the Resurrection of Christ in Jerusalem, was razed to the ground. Okay, so those are the 5 centuries of peaceful coexistence that the professors are telling everyone occurred
peaceful, scare quotes for everyone out there.
Until those evil Christians decided to go and do this crazy crusade, which
totally randomly.
It came out of nowhere, And even if you look at the sources, when you look at Pope Urban, when he's preaching the First Crusade, that's exactly what he's talking about. He's telling you the horrific atrocities they're committing against Christians, the desecration of churches. They would take youths and like disembowel them and tie their intestines and whip them. I mean, really like mind-boggling
disgusting stuff.
That's what the evil crusaders were responding to. Yeah. You don't get that, right? You don't get the context. It's all in
sarcasm.
A vacuum. Yeah.
Just in case people didn't have the sarcasm detectors. Right. Next sponsor is Preborn. You want to make sure that you are supporting pregnancy centers across the country, saving lives by donating to Preborn. We're in a moment, unfortunately, where lies spread quickly. Truth feels really costly, but for Linda, the cost of silence would have meant the end of her baby's life. When Linda learned she was pregnant, she knew abortion was wrong, but fear almost led her to a really dark place. She didn't know where to turn. And then, through the guidance of the Lord, she ended up at a Preborn Network clinic. She was met with prayer, compassion, and the truth. that just overcame her fear. She realized that the baby inside her womb is worthy of life. And so she chose life for her baby. That is the kind of story you are a part of when you donate to Preborn. Go to preborn.com/Allie. Make your donation today to help save a life. That's preborn.com/Allie. And one thing that you said in your books, I think it was The Sword and the Scimitar, when you described the motivation for the Crusades, you talked about agape love, which I thought was so interesting. It would be like very radicalizing to a lot of people out there to hear something like that. You're saying that the Christians who forged the Crusades were not motivated by hate exclusively, of course, hatred for what was being done, but by agape love for their own people, for their women and children. Can you expound upon that?
Yeah, sure. So agape is the Greek, biblical New Testament word for love, which we translate as love. And one of the reasons that I, intentionally picked that word is because I think the English word love is just, it has too many sentimental connotations. And I think that's what too many modern day Christians think biblical love is. Kind of like an emotional,
yeah.
And but agape love is it's like willing the good for the other. Okay, it's like being altruistic, and it's not sentimental, but it's good and it's real, it's practical. So when to early pre-modern Christians, including medieval ones, when they would read about Jesus talking about loving your fellow man, that's what it meant. So if my fellow Christians are being killed and mauled and enslaved and raped, and their churches are being burned, okay? Bombed is later now. Where's my love? So my love was to be altruistic and sacrifice my own welfare. A lot of these first crusaders and all the crusaders, again, to just show you how it's topsy-turvy now, how they teach it. There's this theory they used to go by saying they're all second sons, which means they were, because of primogeniture, the first son gets everything. So the second sons have nothing. So they all decided to be adventurers and go conquer the Holy Land so they can have castles, okay? But the most recent research has shown that's the exact opposite. Actually, a lot of these guys gave away donated their castles and their lands and lost them. Okay, even someone like King Richard, the whole thing with John taking over England, and because he was crusading, so it was a very dangerous thing, not just for your life, but you lost everything. So, but that was muscular love. That was true agape, and that's really what motivated them. And of course, it's amazing now they are so demonized. The Crusaders, yeah, and they are just the horrible ones. And I told you what happened to that German pilgrimage. In 2000, I think, or 1999, because that marked the 1,000-year conquest of Jerusalem by the Crusaders. Large German pilgrimage, 1999, recently walked to Jerusalem wearing shirts with the Arabic word "I apologize."
Oh my gosh! Okay. For the Crusades,
yes, of course.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, my big question is, in multiple fronts, like what happened? Because on the one hand, they still dominate the Middle East. So obviously, we didn't get those Christian lands, those Christian cities back. But at the same time, for a very long time, it seemed like Muslims were isolated to the Muslim world. It's only in relatively recent history that they have started infiltrating Europe and the West. And so what happens to allow them to continue to dominate that part of the world, but what also happened to keep them there for so long?
Right. Well, to answer that, we're going to actually have to go past the Crusades. We can't really jump to now, and that's also very, didactic how we're going to understand it. So, after the Crusades, which really around 1300, they're more or less done. So now does Islam wane? No. Like I told you, now you have the Turks. Now it's the rise of the Ottomans. Okay, so this is one of the most ruthless Turkish dynasty. Okay, which is like they are the jihadists par excellence. Okay, they're the ones who conquered Constantinople in 1453. They invade and conquer the Balkans, Eastern Europe. I mean, how many people? There's still Muslim countries in Europe because they were conquered and forcibly Islamized. And they, in the 16th century, in North Africa, it was just swarming with pirates, Muslim pirates, Barbary. And they just in that century alone, according to the estimates of very objective historians, at least 1.2 million Europeans were enslaved. Okay, you don't hear about that, right? They would go as far as Iceland. and as far as Denmark and England. England, it's it's funny because what's happening today with England, the St. George flag, and it's and everyone's so St. George flag is England's oldest flag, and what is it? It's a red cross on white. And the irony is, a lot of English people are sort of rallying to it as a sign of, it's a sign of patriotism, and they're being accused, oh, you're Islamophobic, et cetera, et cetera. And I think there is some truth to that. Obviously, not that they're Islamophobic, but they're rallying to it as a sign of, you guys are invaders and you're doing what you're doing.
Yeah.
The greater irony that no one knows is that flag was born in the context of war between Muslims and Christians, the St. George flag. So the red and white, the first group to adopt that is the Templars, the Knights of the Temple. And red symbolized blood, martyrdom for Christ, Red Cross. White symbolized purity because they were chaste knights devoted to God, okay? And anyway, it carried on in the Crusader era, and it got conflated with St. George. So St. George was a soldier saint who was martyred around the 3rd, 4th century for not renouncing Christ by pagan Rome. And anyway, so he became sort of a martial saint, and especially for the English, and they adopted that flag, okay? And anyway, long story short, with Edward I, another crusader, then it becomes the flag of England. So I'm just telling you all this to show you how, on the one hand, it seems like a sort of an innocuous thing, a flag. But on the other hand, in and of itself, this flag and the issue it concerns today, which is migration in Islam, with migration in England of Muslims, that's its origin. I mean, it's the classic, he who doesn't know his history will repeat it.
Yeah.
Okay, you don't even know what that flag meant, and you started bringing in the historic enemy, and lo and behold, they're doing to you what used to happen back in the day when you had to go and fight it. Okay, but so finishing that narrative, Iceland, you got the slavery going on. These Barbary pirates, people don't realize that even the United States, distant United States, its very first war as a nation is with Muslims, thinking on the same exact logic. Okay, the Barbary pirates, the Barbary pirates were basically, and this is, I think they started attacking right after the Revolutionary War. They started attacking American sailor vessels in the Atlantic, enslaving them, treating them horrifically, just like I was saying with all the other European slaves. And finally, Thomas Jefferson and John Adams met with one of the Barbary ambassadors, Abdul something. And Thomas Jefferson and Adams are like, what, we did nothing to you. We want to be friends. Maybe we can engage in trade and business. And the Muslim ambassador, just like ISIS, he said, our prophet says you're the enemy, you're the infidel. Our Quran says we must kill and enslave you wherever we find you, et cetera, okay? America's very first war, again, with this same ancient foe, all right? So, all right, so how come, they were confined and now they're not? What's going on? So finally, you got the colonial era, all right? Now, the colonial era, historically, people give it different dates, but let's say 1800. Napoleon goes essentially and conquers Egypt very easily. So what happened in the colonial era, to the people who were colonizing these Europeans, to them, this was a continuation of the Crusades. It was this ancient long war with Islam, okay? Islam had swallowed up so much of formerly Christian lands, slowly got kicked out. Spain, it took 800 years to get it kicked out. In Eastern Europe, similar, hundreds of years to get the Turks kicked out. And now the Europeans are finally the strong ones, and now they're going back into the Islamic lands themselves, the Middle East, India, which is an Islamic, and even further east. And actually, so here's the funny thing. On the one hand now, so if I'll give you a perfect example of how history is distorted. Think of the history I just told you about, this long attack from Islam, right? That's been going on century after century. When my book Sword and Scimitar came out, my agent told me we felt like this is going to be an issue because some professor wrote a book that was very similar. It was called Crusade and Jihad, the 1,000-year war between the global north and the south, Crusade and Jihad. And my book is Sword and Scimitar, 14 centuries of war between Islam and the West. Anyway, I ended up reviewing the book, and it's a tome. It's like 1,000 pages, wow. Right? And it turns out that in this 1,000 pages, which is dealing with the whole conflict purportedly, 50 pages deal with the first 1,000 from the time of Muhammad to the colonial era. Okay, that is where all the savage, wild wars and jihads were going on.
Right.
50 concise pages, and you don't even know any of this stuff that I'm talking about. It sounds like nothing happened. Islam spread, through trade across the Middle East, and then he gets to the colonial era. Oh, and now we got like 600, 700 pages of every conceivable sin and crime the European man did to Muslims and others, okay? And a lot of it, of course, is exaggerated. They didn't even, commit these crimes. But it's, again, you see, there's no context. So today, when people talk about the conflict between the Islamic world and the West, what they'll do is they won't tell you anything that preceded the Crusades, like I told you. They'll start with the Crusades, and the Crusaders were just these evil guys who went and wanted to kill Muslims. And then they'll go to the colonial era, which, again, these crazy Europeans went there for no reason. One of the main reasons for the colonial powers to invade North Africa was to neutralize Barbary, the slave trade system. In fact, it was they who actually abolished slavery too. Europeans, I think the English especially, spearheaded it. Because though we have this big lacuna in history and all we know is the negative stuff that the West did everything's in a vacuum. That's why Islam is a problem today, because now generations of Westerners have been taught how your ancestors were the evil ones, the Crusaders and the colonizers. The Muslims have always been the good, tolerant one. Watch any historic movie, okay, that deals with the Crusades. I mean, you know what I'm talking about. Every crusader is just some bumbling idiot screaming "Deus vult" and he's a hypocrite. And the more he holds a cross, the more evil he really is. And the Muslims, this wise, paragon of virtue and patience,
peace, just like Native Americans.
Yeah. The noble savage myth, right?
Yeah.
Generations of all that and academia and has just convinced so many Westerners that it's my job to become a doormat. If I want to be a good Christian, I need to make up for the sins of my forefathers, which is why as I was telling you, that German pilgrimage saying I'm sorry in Arabic. Okay, that's the mentality.
Yeah.
And that mentality, one of the things that it's doing is, one of the things we're going to do is bring Muslims to live with us and show them how great we are and how we're going to host them and give them all the rights they can ever imagine. And yet, meanwhile, Muslims are still, to their credit, they haven't changed. It's the West that's changed. That's become stupider, to put it bluntly.
And Christians, because you talk about that muscular Christianity.
That really is the big shift, I think. In many ways, I think Christianity has been subverted intentionally. As with all things, I was telling you earlier how, good lies always have a half-truth to them. And of course, Christianity is about love and forgiveness and tolerance, okay? But it seems to be that people or elements that do not like Christianity have convinced Christians that is Christianity. You want to be a good Christian, you're a doormat, okay? And you don't judge. You always turn your cheek. You never
fight back.
You never
say anything is wrong.
Exactly. That's become a good Christian. Well, that is not what a good Christian was in the medieval era or even in the pre-modern era. Okay, they fought against evil. They believed in what was right and trying to enforce what was right. Okay, so that's why they would never do what the modern day watered down Christian is doing. And I also think a lot of Christians are making a virtue out of a vice because it's easier to be that kind of a Christian. It's easier to be non-confrontational and to just let everything happen and never open your mouth. You know? And so the truth is, a lot of the Christians who do this, it's just they're really cowards. And they don't want to stand up for what's right. And then they pat themselves on the back saying, oh, I'm being a good Christian because Jesus told me to be a doormat.
Yeah.
And that would have been so unintelligible to any Christian denomination, Catholic, Orthodox, or Protestant, historically.
Yeah.
Okay. So
I do think Christians have forgotten our responsibility to restrain evil and to push back against evil for the sake of the vulnerable. I mean, you talk about those who forged the Crusades caring for the vulnerable, women, children, people who couldn't defend themselves. I mean, it's the same thing with a lot of issues today. We push back against those pushing evil because of the people over here who are being affected by those evil policies or actions or whatever.
Right.
I think the hard thing is that Christians want to know, like on an everyday basis, is what does that muscular Christianity look like? Because at the end of the day, I've got way more Muslims in my neighborhood. I've got a mosque really close to my house that wasn't there 10 years ago. And that's just reality. And I'm just a mom. And so I think a lot of people don't know what to do. So they flee to like the country, hoping that it doesn't follow them there. And they just they don't know. They see it's a problem, but they don't know what to do. So what is your take on that?
Well, my take on that is the real problem, and believe it or not, I don't think the problem right now is even Islam, because Islam is inherently weak in the modern era. Islam's only a problem when you let it be a problem. Okay, so if you look at Europe, for example, it's a huge problem in various countries, right? The UK and France and Spain, Italy, most of Western Europe. Meanwhile, in Hungary and Poland, there's not a problem. And why is that? Are they going to war? No, they just said, no thanks. Okay, so that my point is, it's an easily fixed problem, which goes back to what you were saying, because they were confined to their own realm, they're not going to hurt you if they're there, right? So I think it's important to keep in mind, and that's why people get upset. One time a lot of English people are saying Muslims are invading England. Sorry, they're not. They're being welcomed in. There's a big difference. Okay. Right. Invasion is when you're resisting and fighting.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay. But when they're being brought in and treated like kings, that's not an invasion. So my point is, if you want to, before you can address a problem, you have to locate the source. And it's actually a mistake to think the source is the Muslims. Okay. The source is the people enabling and allowing this to happen. I often give the analogy of, if I go to a zoo and there's a enclosure of zebras, and then I put a line, and then the lion, lo and behold, kills the zebras. Who's really at fault, me or the lion? I think it's me. The lion's doing what the lion's going to do.
Yeah.
The Muslim's going to do what the Muslim's going to do. But but it's the person who's insisting on bringing them in and putting them in and forcing you to suppress your culture and your heritage and everything about your life so you can accommodate them. That's the problem. So I think Islam is an inherent issue that can be, it's very finite and can be dealt with, especially if you don't live in the Islamic world. If you're a Christian or a non-Muslim living under Islam, that's a different story. But in America, for example, or even Europe, you are creating your own problem by inviting it in. Okay, so it's actually an easily fixed problem. But it goes back to what you're saying, this whole, what's happening in the West, where it's not just that they're bringing them in, is they also don't even have the sort of moral fiber to respond anymore because it's been stripped away. Because to be a Christian, like I said, the chief virtue is you're a doormat. You don't do anything. You don't argue. You don't speak up. Okay, this would have been so bizarre for other Christians. That would have been seen as evil, actually, because you're an accomplice. Okay, I mean, is that how Jesus behaved? We forget Jesus made a whip of cords and engaged in violence and hurled tables. Okay, so again, I'm not saying Jesus is violent, but there's a time for everything. Right. There's a time for resistance. There's a time for forgiveness. There's a time for, and it seems that everything has been stripped and it's just, you're a doormat. I saw, I often mention this, the Super Bowl, like maybe 2 years ago. And, to have a commercial in the Super Bowl is like a big thing. Everyone's watching it. And this commercial just pops up and it's just scenes, okay, of people sitting, getting their feet washed, right? And then at the very end, it says, Jesus didn't preach hate. He washed feet.
He gets us.
Yeah. One of those, right? And then, but there was something interesting. It wasn't just random people washing random people's feet. Everyone on their hands and knees was like a white woman or a white man who looks traditional, conservative, maybe Christian. And everyone getting their foot washed was a trans person, a Muslim man, a Muslim woman in a hijab, an illegal migrant apparently because it's like at the border. All right, so that is the message they want Christians to embrace. If you want to be a Christian, then your whole job is to just enable anything I want. Yeah, serve me. Okay, and it's just sad because I think a lot of Christians believe that's the case.
Last sponsor for the day is Constitution Wealth. Do you know whether you are unknowingly funding companies that oppose your biblical values with every investment you make? Do you know if your hard-earned dollars are supporting businesses that actively work against the Christian principles that you hold dear? Your investments should work as hard as you do and align with what you believe in. Many Christian investors don't realize their portfolios include companies that fund causes that contradict Scripture. 2 Corinthians 6:14 says, "Do not be yoked together with unbelievers." Make sure that you are funding things, that you are investing in businesses and causes that you actually believe in. Constitution Wealth makes sure that that is possible for you and that that is happening with every single dollar you invest. Go to constitutionwealth.com/Allie for a free consultation. constitutionwealth.com/Allie. Constitution Wealth is a registered investment advisor. You should review Constitution Wealth's disclosures at constitutionwealth.com to understand their services and fees. All investing involves risk, including the risk of loss. This is a paid endorsement. My opinions are my own.
The whole blueprint, of Islam is kind of like it's catered to. It's like, think of a little boy who wants to be a pirate, and you can go have fun, go on adventures, kill, raid, do whatever you want. That's Islam, okay? And that's when you look at these guys, ISIS, and that's how they live. That's what they see themselves as. We're these heroes, and we're on an adventure, and we're going to have fun, and then we're going to go to heaven when we die. So, in a way, it is kind of not very mature, but you can also see why it's appealing to certain demographics.
Like Andrew Tate.
Yeah. I think I don't know a whole lot about it. I mean, I know what his thing is, but we can talk a little bit about how the appeal of Islam and this sort of masculine Islam, and I think what's really going on is again, it's not really Islam's fault in this case. It's just that we or people in the West have been put in such a position where we have no more role models for ourselves. Okay, because the Christians are not role models unless you understand who they were. So as I talk about the real Christians in one of my book, Defenders of the West, and it talks about how those kings would actually stand up and fight against Islam, et cetera, et cetera. But if you're a modern day Christian or just a Western person, what is our role model supposed to be as a man, for example? There's just nothing there. And so when I see Westerners kind of gravitating towards, let's say, Islamic masculinity, it's because we literally have nothing here. So it kind of makes sense. All right. I'll gravitate towards the Islamic thing before I'll want to go sit and hang out with a man in drag. You know what I mean? If that's the best that the West can come up with, that's our alternative. So I think it's not that Islam is inherently attractive. No pre-modern Christian would have found any of that, but that's because they had their own masculine form of faith and masculine heritage. But now that the West has been so stripped of all of that, when they see Muslims living that way, it's kind of like, wow, that's pretty cool, right? It's
powerful.
Yeah, but that's because we have absolutely, as a man, you're completely emasculated here. Okay, so it's in other words, once again, it's what the West is doing, okay, is what's making Islam look appealing. Just like it's what the West is doing that's making Islam a problem and a threat in Europe because they're bringing them in. Yeah. And again, the West is emasculating men, and it's just, the sexual perversion and this like weird gender issues that are going on. It's really unappealing and despicable. So it makes sense for a Western man to look anywhere else and find inspiration there because there's literally nothing here. And I wish it was just there's nothing. There's just the exact opposite. There's just disgusting stuff.
Yeah. I've heard stories from Christians who have spent time in the Middle East, Christians who know the Muslim world well, and they talk about conversions of Muslims to Christianity. Some say that this is happening at a greater rate than it was before. Do you think that is something that is happening? Is that a reason for us to be hopeful?
No, that's definitely a thing that's happening, and a lot of Muslims complain about it. Like the serious radical Muslims. I've seen them. I watch a lot of Arabic programming, and I've seen where sheikhs and Muslims get up and complain and say millions of Muslims are leaving the faith for Christianity because of usually Arabic-speaking apologists and polemicists who talk about Islam and Christianity. I watch their shows too, and very interesting because they expose Muhammad. The problem is a lot of Muslims don't know the truth of their own religion. Yeah. They really don't. A lot of them do think it's moderate. A lot of them do think Muhammad was a great guy, okay? Because they just, it's hidden from them. A lot of the clerics and the sheikhs are smart. They only introduce it sort of when the time is right. But of course, a lot of them do know what it is. But the conversion and an apostasy out of Islam, that's definitely a real thing. And they all have very interesting, similar stories, which makes it kind of a very interesting thing is the phenomena that every Muslim that converts to Christianity seems to talk about. And this is Jesus in dreams talking to them. And this is not localized. It's everywhere. It's your African Muslims who convert, Arabs, Iranians, all throughout. It's kind of Indonesians. And so there's certainly something happening to that effect. And a lot of Muslims, like I said, that's why a lot of these countries are very restrictive towards Christian. In Iran, if you're preaching Christianity, you're immediately seen as an agent of Israel or America or both. Okay, because so they really restrict it and they arrest them and they bust home churches because there is, and it's interesting because to Muslims it's the opposite of what's happening to us. They're sick of Islam because of what it really is, and they live the unadulterated form. And then when they're introduced to real Christianity, okay, it's of course appealing, and that's something that they start kind of wanting to gravitate towards.
Yeah. I can imagine maybe at some point that they start to detect the pattern that Islam is also, it seems, anti-civilization. Most majority Muslim countries aren't good countries to live in.
No.
They're impoverished, they're restrictive. And so, I mean, it seems that at some point they would kind of see the correlation. Wait, why do I want to leave the country that is dominated by the beliefs I had? Any of us Christians would love to live in a country that is dominated by the beliefs that we have. And they have that in spades. They can go to so many places and have what we can't have, and yet their countries are terrible.
And their countries are terrible because historically the economy of the Islamic world was based on plunder. Okay, the Ottomans, for example, their entire economy was based on conquering and enslaving and selling slaves and appropriating their possessions and taking their land.
Yeah.
Okay, they weren't exactly scientists, despite what you may hear. Okay,
that is what we hear.
I know
that they invented math and science.
No, well, I mean, there's elements of
contributions.
There's contributions, and oftentimes it's not Muslims; it's Christians and Jews who were living under Islam. Okay, and who maybe had converted a week earlier, so they don't get killed. So they were continuing the sort of thing that they had always been doing. But to give you, and again, to just show you how topsy-turvy everything is taught. So I was talking about the colonial era, which is always seen as the white man's sin, right? What he did. Believe it or not, that was the best time for the people living in the Middle East, in India, and in Africa. They admit it. Yeah, this was the best time. They were at a high level of civilization and economy and health and nutrition was much, much better. Okay, and yet this is, the evil white man. And if you compare and contrast that with areas where Muslims went and colonized, so for example in Spain, because that was a microcosm of jihad and crusade, because Muslims conquered it in the 8th century, and they didn't get kicked out till like the 16th or 17th. And so the Christians were mostly in the north and the Muslims were in the south during these wars. The middle zone is like it's still infertile and completely devastated from nonstop warfare and constant raids that the Muslims were obligated as part of it's a jihad doctrine to go raiding every 2 years and kill as many Christians. So on the one hand, okay, Islam has contributed nothing but death and destruction and conquest and slavery. And it's presented as this wonderful, tolerant religion. And Christian Europe and the West it's not perfect, obviously, but it's actually brought science and health and nutrition and literacy. And it is presented as the great evil one. And it's hard for me to start to actually believe that this topsy-turvy sort of thing is not by design and it's organic. I mean, this is definitely by design and it's pretty diabolical.
It is very diabolical to our peril. Yeah. You have a new book coming out in November. Tell us what the title is and where people can pre-order it. Sure.
The title is The Two Swords of Christ, which actually speaks very much to what we're talking about. And the subtitle is 5 Centuries of War Between Islam and the Warrior Monks of Christendom, the Knights of the Temple and the Hospital. And this is a perfect example, this book. So it's about the Templars and the Hospitallers, who, again, if you listen to like conspiratorial history, they're not what they seem. But what these guys were, so let's talk about the Hospitallers, for example. These were what these men were during the Holy Wars. They were committed to helping pilgrims who were being killed and attacked by Muslims, and giving them medical aid, food, cleaning them, bathing them, giving them their beds. Okay, it was a hospice. It was the origin of the hospital. But before long, they realized that why wait till Christian pilgrims are attacked and almost killed? Why don't we nip it in the bud and protect them? So they took up arms. So these men who were, you would think, the most passive and they just care about health and helping you out, became warriors. Because that was, again, there was nothing wrong with that because we're defending against evil aggressors, right? So, and the Templars, the same thing. They were, again, these were holy monks. They were monks, okay, committed to God, but they saw no problem and no contradiction in taking up the sword. And the reason I call it the two swords of Christ is it goes back to the famous verse, I think in Luke, where Jesus says, whoever, if you don't have a sword, sell your cloak and buy one. And the disciples say, Lord, here's two swords. And he says, that's enough. Okay. Now, today, here's again, perfect example of modern Christian nonsense. They've allegorized this verse into nothingness. It means nothing now. Well, what does it mean? It's not a sword, they'll tell you. But to pre-modern and definitely medieval Christians, what it meant is there's two main evils that we can and should fight. One is spiritual forces, and that's a spiritual sword. And one is human evil forces, and that's a secular sword. Okay, and that is enough, right? Because those are the two main enemies that you should fight and resist. And, people forget again that Jesus, a lot of it is implied. So, for example, what does Jesus do when he performs a miracle on someone? The first thing he tells them is what? Go repent, right? And when it came to the centurion, Roman centurion, he didn't tell him, go repent and quit the army because you're responsible for the killing of probably thousands of people as a centurion commander. He didn't say that at all. So why? Same thing when soldiers went to John the Baptist, said, what must we do to be saved? He didn't tell them quit the army. He said, be content with your wages. Okay, so again, what I'm trying to say is that for a lot of pre-modern Christians, the issue of violence for a just cause was not open to debate. There was nothing contradictory about that and being a Christian. So anyway, that's what the book is about, the two swords of Christ. And it's also a little bit of a pun because I ended up writing about two guys, the Templars and the Hospitallers, who, because they really took it to heart that it was important to fight and defend their fellow men, they became the two swords of Christ.
Yeah. Wow. This is so fascinating. I could talk to you for hours more, but I really encourage people to not only pre-order The Two Swords of Christ, but go out and get his other books too. This has sparked so much interesting conversation and given us so much knowledge in our home. My husband and I have been just learning so much from you. So thank you for dedicating so many years to this and for talking to us today.
Thanks very much, Allie. I'm very happy to hear all that.